Hello, and welcome to the You Know You Deserve More podcast spotlight interview series. I am Stephanie Purrier-Helling, your host and founder of SPH Services, leading people and teams to success. I am so excited to have my special guest with me today, Alex Jackiw. And before we jump in to talk about leadership, building resilient teams, and leading change, I want to tell you about this incredible woman. So some of you listeners, whether you're listening, tuning in live or catching the replay, know Alex very well. She is a pillar in the multifamily real estate industry. But for those of you who don't know Alex, let me tell you a little bit about her. So Alex is a nationally recognized real estate executive with extensive experience managing large portfolios throughout the United States for both privately held and publicly traded companies, currently serving as the Chief Operating Officer of Hayes Gibson Property Services. In addition to property and asset management, she is experienced in marketing, training, consulting, and business development. She served as chairman of the board of the National Apartment Association in 2013 and was only the second woman out of a total of 4 so far to hold that esteemed position. She served as president of the National Apartment Association Education Institute from 2008 through 2009 and was a pivotal influence to how I served as the president of the Education Institute. So thank you for that, Alex. Alex was inducted into the National Apartment Association Hall of Fame in June 2018 in San Diego. Induction into the NAA Hall of Fame represents the highest honor that can be bestowed upon a rental housing professional. As I mentioned, Alex was the second woman and the 20th leader to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So the second woman to lead the National Apartment Association Board of Directors, as well as the second woman to be inducted into the NAA Hall of Fame. Alex represents the best of the rental housing industry, says NAA President and CEO Bob Pinnegar. She has been a champion of NAA and the Education Institute. Her commitment to lifelong learning is apparent in the work she does to educate industry professionals, as well as the new scholarship established in her name. Through her work, Alex has earned the respect of her peers, which is why we are honored to induct her into the Hall of Fame. In addition, Alex has held adjunct faculty appointments at both Virginia Tech and Ball State University, where she has continued to teach residential property management programs. She is past chair of the Residential Property Management Advisory Board at Virginia Tech and completed a 4-year term as president of Ball State University Residential Property Management Advisory Board in 2014. Alex is also a member of the Institute of Real Estate Management, National Multifamily Housing Council, Housing Education and Research Association, and Indy Crew. So without further ado, Alex, thank you so much for saying yes and for being here and for being a trailblazer for me and many of us who look up to you for your leadership, and we thank you. So thanks for being here.
Hi, Stephanie. It's good to be with you.
So let's jump right in. I know that leadership development is something that you are very passionate about, as am I. And so my first set of questions is surrounding transformational leadership. And as we've just heard, and as I know personally, your leadership has inspired many people and teams to push beyond their perceived limits. Can you share your personal philosophy or an experience that has shaped your ability to lead in this way?
Well, leadership comes through a series of experiences and the time we spend kind of learning our craft. But early on in my career, I had a mentor who was a formal naval officer of all things, and he was encouraging me to take on a role that I didn't think I was prepared for. And I remember I was driving him back to the airport, and he leaned across as I'm staring at the road and pointed his finger at me and said, "Jackiw, you need to learn to find power vacuums and fill them." And I thought, wow, I'm not sure what that means, but I remember ruminating about it all the way home and thinking power vacuums, filling them. So he's basically saying find situations where people are reluctant to lead and to jump in, and what's the worst that can happen. And I think he made me a little bit less timid and a lot more willing to take on the tough tasks that maybe people shied away from. And, I really credit him with pushing me in a direction that helped me hone my leadership skills.
I love that. And I remember you telling part of that story when I saw you speak at the South Carolina Apartment Association conference recently. And I think sometimes it does take that leader who sees something in us that maybe we don't see yet and encourages us to push beyond those perceived limits or boundaries or walls that sometimes are self-imposed. I love that story so much.
And I think that that's what I've tried to do with people that I work with. I try to encourage them to look deeper, to dig deeper. And oftentimes, I think the sign of a good leader, the mark of a good leader, is to look for and see potential in people before they see it in themselves.
I couldn't agree more. So great. All right. So my next question, as a leader, how do you balance creating stability for your team while also embracing disruption as an opportunity for growth?
I think if you ask my team, they'd tell you I'm a perpetual disruptor. I'm always asking the question of, well, what if we did it differently? How else can we look at this problem? So I think I've sort of cultivated that within my teams just by virtue of who I am. And sometimes they roll their eyes up in their heads and they say, uh-oh, I know it's coming. But I like to keep people a little bit off balance so that they're thinking in new ways and thinking about situations differently than they might otherwise.
I love that. So because they know that they're, your team, you've been with them for a while and they know that about you and come to expect it, I imagine that that also has created a sense of resilience in them because you've encouraged them. They know that you're going to ask, how can we do this differently? So I imagine you've encouraged them to start asking that for themselves, right? That's awesome.
Well, they usually, when they come to me, for example, with a problem or a situation, they will already preface their remarks by saying, I've thought about this in a whole bunch of different ways, and here are some things I think we can do. So I think that resilience not only comes from people being open to different ideas and my being open to letting them try different things, but we have sort of a culture of celebrating mistakes. And I think that when you look at mistakes from the perspective of teaching moments and what did we learn from that? What are we going to do differently? I think it builds resilience in the team because they're also less reluctant to make a mistake. When you create an environment or a culture where people are fearful and they're afraid to misstep and they stay within the boundaries and they color within the lines so that they don't get in trouble, I think it causes an organization not to grow as organically as it otherwise could.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. When you feel that you are being boxed in or held back or that you have to walk on eggshells, it dampens creativity, number one,
Sure.
because in order to foster creativity, you have to have a culture where mistakes are okay. And as you mentioned, it's a teaching moment, and that's how we learn. And fail stands for first attempt in learning, right? And I don't know any successful person that I've interacted with, that I've interviewed, from all different industries, that hasn't gone through a series of failures. And that is actually how they became a success, because they knew that failure was part of success. And you fall down 100 times, but the 101st time, well, by gosh, you got it, right? So I love that philosophy, and I agree that it really helps to propel your team further towards success when you allow failure, and it is okay. Now, obviously, we want to encourage excellence, but we don't get there without our fair share of mistakes and learning opportunities, as you mentioned.
Well,
Right.
for me, it's an issue of continuous improvement. So
Mm,
I don't like to use the word failure, but if people are continually improving, then
mm,
that's certainly a step in the right direction for me.
I love that as well. Not failure, but continuous improvement. And that's a mindset shift, right? So, my next question for you, Alex, is as a leader. So we just talked about, your team pretty much knows that you're going to rock the boat a little bit for continuous improvement. But how do you balance creating stability for your team while also, sorry, misread that. Let me go backtrack a second. You've led several teams through change, as we just talked about. What are some key lessons that you've learned about overcoming resistance? So even though your existing team knows that you're going to rock the boat a little bit, there is a natural resistance that comes up anytime we try to implement a change initiative. And most of us only like change if we're the ones leading it and it's our idea. Otherwise, it's human nature to have resistance. So how do you help them overcome that natural resistance that's going to occur and ensure smoother transitions?
Well, as I was thinking about this, one of the things I thought about is during the course of my career, I've been through 3 company mergers. And with those mergers came high anxiety and concern, huge changes, huge shifts in leadership, oftentimes people going away, new people coming into the picture. And so, as I thought about that, I think that communication in the face of change is always going to be your best friend. The ability to admit that it's going to be uncomfortable, to admit that people are anxious, to recognize those emotions and own them, and then be able to explain why the change is necessary, how it's going to be rolled out, what the process is going to be. I may be a disruptor, but I'm also very process oriented. So, to the extent that people can know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to roll out, and that you communicate that consistently and thoroughly and continually, I think it helps people calm down and develop a comfort level that they're going to be okay and they can get through it.
I love that so much. So something that you just mentioned that I'm adding here to the banner is making sure that we recognize the emotion, because it is going to happen. People are emotional beings that are sometimes logical, some more than others. And so we do have to recognize and acknowledge that, which can help. But then you also talked a lot about communication, the who, what, when, where, why, how. And when I was in the corporate world, before I started my solopreneur journey, one of my leaders that made a huge impact in my life, he always said that over and over. Not only was he focused on communicating the who, what, when, where, why, how, but anytime someone would come to him with a proposal, a suggestion, a challenge, he's like, okay, give me the who, what, when, where, why, how, then we can talk about it. So I love that so much. My next question, I want to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence. So you mentioned the importance of acknowledging emotions during change, and emotional intelligence is a huge part of that. I love that we've been talking more about emotional intelligence in the business world the last 10 or so years. That didn't used to be the case. Perhaps it's more women in leadership. I don't know. But I think it's great that we're talking about it and acknowledging the importance of emotional intelligence just as much as IQ. EQ is as important as IQ. So with that in mind, how has EQ or emotional intelligence played a role in your success as a leader? And what advice would you give to other leaders looking to strengthen this skill?
Well, I think emotional intelligence is an evolutionary process. It comes with time. It comes primarily as a result of feedback, good, honest feedback that a leader gets from, a 360-degree review from people around them. But I think that what's caused me the most self-reflection, which has resulted in what I call self-awareness about who I am and how I respond, is the feedback I've gotten from others. And to be able to look for that feedback, ask for it, and say, okay, tell me what your reaction was to my response in that situation. Learning how to self-regulate, learning what triggers the kind of emotions that are not productive in a work environment or not productive in any kind of a relationship. The studies show that you can have the highest IQ in the world, but it's the leaders with high EQ that are the most successful. And we see examples of that all around us, even in current events today. So I think that those people that are willing to listen to constructive criticism, that think about the day and what was positive and what was negative and how things could have been handled differently, become more emotionally aware, and as a result develop a stronger EQ.
Absolutely. So many great nuggets. I'm typing quickly. So, I am, as a leadership consultant and speaker, I leverage assessments with my leadership teams. And so things like DISC, Clifton Strengths, MBTI, the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and all of them help people to really focus on leading themselves first before leading others. And so you mentioned self-awareness and how important that is, and I couldn't agree more. And when we leverage assessments like that and we ask for feedback, as you mentioned, we also uncover perhaps blind spots that existed that we couldn't see them. That's why they're called blind spots, right? Because our personalities are shaped to in large part when we're children. And so we have triggers and we learn certain ways of perhaps coping or communicating that aren't always effective. And we take that into, grade school and college and the workplace. And if we're not focused on continual improvement and really looking in the mirror and challenging the stories that we've either believed or told ourselves, we're going to continue to repeat some of the same cycles, some of which is not healthy or good or productive, right? And I think we can both think of people that we've worked with or for that had great emotional intelligence. They're not perfect people, but they're aware. So they're aware of their triggers. They can redirect, right? They have a great ability to sort of read the room or connect with others. And then there are other people who, in some cases, are highly successful in different areas, but they lack self-awareness. Like they don't have a clue that their triggers from childhood are like right there in the boardroom with everybody. So, I'm passionate about this topic, obviously, because it's what I do, but I really want to help people. I want to help people be better and improve. And we do that by being human, and we do that by connecting. So yes, we're in business to make profit for our companies, for ourselves, for our investors, all the things. But at the end of the day, it's a people business, right? And so if we're not focused on leading ourselves and leading others and the people component, we're not going to be as successful. And research and studies indicate, statistics from Gallup and Pew, that the more we focus on developing leaders, the more profitable the company is going to be. So I could talk about this one like for
well, I had to laugh the other day because I was doing site visits, as I often do, and I heard one of the site people whisper to her regional, "Boy, I was really scared when she was coming out, but she's really kind of a normal person." And I thought, okay, I'll take that. Normal's good.
Well, I think sometimes people with, strong, dominant, decisive personalities, it can be intimidating to others before they get to know them. And again, they make assumptions or tell themselves stories,
Sure.
but then once they see the human, it's a completely different paradigm, right? I mean, I've experienced that, believe it or not, a couple of times. So, all right, my next question. Looking back, can you share a moment where you recognize that your leadership had truly transformed a team or an individual's career path? You mentioned, when we opened, about a leader who'd been very influential for you. But what about you, Alex? I'd love to hear the influence or impact that you've had on teams or individuals.
Well, Stephanie, for me, the great delight is seeing people that I have encountered along the way, either as a professor at a university or in my work life, that has become successful. So I still remember a day when I was walking into an office in Rockville, Maryland, as part of a business development meeting in the hopes of landing a management contract, only to encounter my potential client as a former student from Virginia Tech who was
Wow.
sitting across the desk. And I was just absolutely delighted. I couldn't have been more pleased. In a more recent situation, I was involved in a fairly complicated portfolio here in Indianapolis, and the asset manager for that particular portfolio was a student of mine from Ball State. And again, it was one of these uh, delightful moments of seeing someone doing well that, that I had, whose life I had touched in some way. I have a woman working for me as a regional vice president who started as a part-time cleaning lady at a property, and felt like she had a love for this business and asked me what it would take to become an on-site manager, is what her initial goal was. And from there, she just propelled herself forward, got her CPM designation, and the fact that a little bit of encouragement helped her to envision herself in an entirely different role with an entirely different life is something I still smile about today.
That's so incredible. And we've heard a lot of stories in our industry where people started as a housekeeper or a groundskeeper, and they've gone on to become, in some cases, CEOs of companies, which is such an inspiration. And, for our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with multifamily real estate or residential property management, yes, we have four-year college degree programs that are available through Virginia Tech and Ball State and other universities, but you don't have to have a four-year degree in residential property management to be a huge success or find the right opportunity for you in this space. And I think that's such an inspiration, because you can really become anything that you want to be as long as it's more of who you already are. And it, goes with a little bit hard work, but then also having people like yourself who can encourage someone who may think, I'm not good enough or I don't have the right credentials. Well, hard work and perseverance sometimes trumps credentials, right? So
Along with EQ.
Along with EQ, absolutely, absolutely. We cannot forget that. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about diversity, which is something that I know that you're passionate about and supportive of. And we both know that organizations thrive when we embrace diverse perspectives. How have you seen inclusive leadership contribute to successful transformations? And you can speak to within your own organizations that you've worked for, obviously through your volunteer leadership at the various organizations that you've been involved in.
Well, I think I was chairman of NAA in 2013, and as I worked my way through the chairs and eventually became chairman, I was fortunate to travel to the various associations. And one of the things that struck me as I would meet with the boards of a lot of the associations and visit with them is what a lack of diversity there was in the room. And, I'm not talking about just what I call male, pale, and stale, but I'm talking about lack of gender diversity, lack of ethnic diversity, lack of diversity of thought. I don't ever want to be in a room where everybody thinks exactly the way I do and agrees with me all the time. That doesn't grow an organization or strengthen an organization. So for me, that's always been important because I see the value in that. And so my initial foray into thinking about and talking about and articulating a strategy for DE&I was through NAA. And, my kind of dipping my toe in the water was starting a DE&I scholarship for people to attend NAA designation courses and certification courses. And seeing what an impact that had over the course of the last decade, along with the initiatives that have taken place at NAA, warms my heart, because now when you go to a conference and you look around, you see a lot of people that don't look like you and me. And that's as it should be, because we represent a very small part of that mosaic of people that service our residents in the field. And residents want to feel comfortable walking into the office and seeing people that look like them also. So we have to develop leaders that think that way and encourage other leaders that haven't embraced that yet to think about inclusion in a different way to help their own organizations and help our industry.
Absolutely. And we have seen such a change, right? So you mentioned 2013. And so here we are, 12 years later, and we've seen such a positive change in terms of the makeup and the mosaic, as you mentioned, which is a beautiful thing. I think people feel more comfortable not only because they see others that are more like them, but also more different than them, right? And so now we've got this melting pot of diversity, which, as you mentioned, is as it should be. But people are now not only more comfortable because they see people that look like them, but they're seeing people who are in positions where they have a voice and their voice is valued and their perspectives are valued. You also mentioned you don't need a bunch of people in a room that think exactly like you. And really none of us do, right? Because if I only have people that think like me, then we talked about blind spots earlier, then I'm going to exist in a vacuum. And I'm not going to get the best perspectives that I need to really make the best decision and move forward. So it's exciting to see. There's still a lot more work I think that needs to be done, but it's encouraging and exciting to see that we're moving forward in the right direction. And hopefully, as you mentioned, those who perhaps haven't embraced that yet will be able to do that because they're influenced by others who have. All right, Alex, I want to talk about resiliency a little bit, both building resilient teams as well as your own personal resilience as a leader. How have you cultivated resilience within your teams? What strategies have been most effective in keeping morale strong during challenging times? So we've gone through a lot of changes in the last 5 years, obviously COVID and quiet quitting and all of the things that came along with that. Now we've been talking about market challenges and economic challenges the last year or more. So lots of change that's happening. How do you help your team get through that?
Well, resilience is sometimes learned by observing other people's reactions. And I guess I tie resilience to EQ a little bit, because people that are emotionally self-aware tend not to get sucked into um, that kind of negative mindset of the glass being half empty. And I think that teams that openly discuss issues and problems and talk about obstacles are become more resilient and become more self-aware and become more supportive of one another. I think that a team becomes resilient because collectively each person is aware of the other members of the team, what their triggers are, and how they can best support them. So, from my standpoint, to make my teams more resilient, I need to know that team well enough to know what it's going to take to help them overcome whatever obstacle they perceive, and then I'll be standing behind them, helping them.
Great insights. So, in addition to the assessments that I mentioned, I also leverage Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. And a lot of what you just mentioned really points to that, right? So the first dysfunction, which is the biggest one, it's the foundation, is lack of trust. And how do we build trust? By being human and real and authentic. So you mentioned teams that openly discuss issues become more resilient and self-aware, but we have to create an environment that feels safe enough to have those real conversations and openly discuss things without it being shied upon if you express an opinion that perhaps is the only one like it or the unpopular one. He actually talks a lot about healthy conflict. So another huge dysfunction is the avoidance of conflict, which I see a lot on teams. And there's this artificial harmony. It looks like harmony, but it's artificial because no one really does feel safe saying what they really think or feel. And that comes from lack of trust. So everything that you just mentioned is so key. In order for a team to build resilience, you've got to have emotional intelligence, as you mentioned. You've got to build trust, and you do that by being authentic. And you've got to create an environment where it's safe to have healthy debate. And we don't all have to agree, and quite honestly, we shouldn't. So my next question to you is about leadership pressure. So obviously in your role and the roles that you've held, there's a lot of pressure from your team, from clients, from residents. So you're getting it from all angles. And when you think about the pressure that comes with leadership, how do you personally maintain your own resilience and prevent burnout?
Well, first of all, I think that we owe it to ourselves to be in jobs that we love and enjoy and that are fun for us. And I've often said to myself internally and to others out loud that as soon as a job is no longer fun for me, I will leave that. I will leave that job. So I think the pressure and the stress is relieved significantly if there are more enjoyable moments than there are unenjoyable moments, if that's a word. But uh, you know, I sort of have an off and on switch. I can I can turn off the business side of my head. And, I'm naturally inquisitive, so I like to read. I like to listen to podcasts. I love to travel. So I think people should unplug and disengage and spend time doing the things that they enjoy. Um, since COVID, I've perfected the art of cooking and love to cook and find it to be very relaxing and interesting. So, reading about various kinds of ingredients and spices has become a new hobby of mine. But there are lots of ways where we can still engage our minds, but turn off that switch where you're consistently obsessing about work. We should never be in an environment where we feel absolutely stressed and anxious every Sunday evening in anticipation of the week ahead.
Absolutely. So, for any of our listeners who may be in a situation where they are stressed on Sunday evening and they're not feeling enjoyment in their work or loving their jobs, what would you tell them to do?
Well, I think you need to do an honest assessment. Sit down with a piece of paper and write out all the things you like about the job first. Then write down the things that are causing you anxiety. Can you change them? Are you overemphasizing the things that are bothering you? Can you confront them by having a conversation with the person that might be contributing to that? And if all else fails, remove yourself from the situation. I think it's never healthy to stay in an environment that causes you emotional distress, which will eventually cause you physical distress. And I've been there and I understand what it feels like. And so I often have these conversations with people when they're unhappy in their jobs. And I say, let's talk about what you're unhappy about and what we can do about it, if anything, and what you want the end result to look like. But people need to sit down and evaluate objectively what's good, what's not so good. Does the good outweigh the bad? Can I change the bad? And then make a rational decision from there.
Such great advice. So, when you were talking, it reminds me of the PAL principle, which is what I heard at one of our apartmentalized conferences years ago. It must maybe 20 years ago. And I will go back and I have his book, but I can't remember him, but I remember the PAL principle. And the PAL principle is exactly as you just mentioned. So you basically have three choices. The first one, the P stands for proactively change it. So can you proactively change it? Make your list. Can you change the things that you don't like? Or can you live with it? Okay, here's the good, here's the bad. Can I live with the bad and just accept it? Or as you mentioned, your third and final choice is to leave. And that's it. And that PAL principle applies in every area of life when you're faced with a decision or you're at a crossroads. And I think people get stuck because they don't make a decision, right? And so then you get stuck ruminating in it. And it's this circular, experience where you're like on a hamster wheel. And that's even causing you more stress. And so the PAL principle, it's amazing. That's exactly what Alex was just talking about. Proactively change it, accept it, or leave. That's it. You're done. All right. My next question for you, Alex, is about women in leadership. And I know this is a topic that you and Cindy and Rhonda have spoken about at multiple conferences. And I hope to have the three of you back in the future to talk more about women in leadership. But women in leadership often face additional expectations or pressures in leadership roles. How have you built resilience in the face of these challenges?
I've been doing this for 40 plus years. So early on in my career, I was frequently the only woman in the room. And many times people assumed I was there to serve coffee. But I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by people that not only encouraged me, but made it clear to me that I belonged. And I think that as people become comfortable in their roles, and I don't care what gender they are, what sexual orientation they are, what ethnic persuasion they are, if they're comfortable in their skin and they know their stuff, they know they belong in the room. And I think that developing that presence and understanding that you belong, that you're prepared, will take you a long way. And I think preparation's the key. No one will take you seriously if you come into a room and you're not well prepared, if you don't know your stuff. But if you show up and you're prepared and you've done your homework and you're ready to lead, or you're ready to be part of a team, then I think you will be embraced, regardless of your otherness. And I think that's the important piece.
Such great advice. And, when I talked to Cindy about this, and Rhonda and a few others recently on the podcast, other women, the majority of the responses were, look within. What can you do to take charge, to step in, to find your own seat at the table, right? To speak up. And I think that's such great advice, because yes, while we may come across situations where, and certainly it's changed over the last 40 years, thank God for trailblazers like you, but we still face those challenges. But again, it's a mindset thing, because that challenge may exist where maybe someone's not open to you, or they're resistant to giving you an opportunity to speak or be part of a meeting, or whatever the case may be, or part of an organization. You can choose to either believe their story and retreat, or you can say, well, this is going to be a challenge. So what can I do to overcome this and show them that I absolutely do belong? I think that's such incredible advice. Thank you.
Well, it's my mantra has always been, prove them wrong.
I love it. I love it. And you do, and you have, and you will continue to do so. I have faith in you, Alex. All right. So as we wrap up, I have one final question for you. So when I first started, the podcast has been around for a while, but when I first started this Spotlight series, specifically with leaders from the multifamily space, it was in preparation for RPM Careers Week, which was a couple months ago. And so I want people to hear from our leaders about this incredible industry. So when you think about RPM careers, and I guess we're kind of speaking to two audiences here. One, for any of our listeners who really don't know much about residential property management or multifamily real estate, but also perhaps for our listeners who are newer leaders in this space and they're looking for more opportunity. What would you tell them in terms of where to find that opportunity and how to get started?
Well, the easiest place to start is to look for apartment communities in your area, in your neighborhoods, in the cities in which you live. Visit them, talk to the people that are there on site, and learn about what it is they do and what they like about their jobs. I think that one of the beauties of residential property management is there's a position for everybody at every level. Whether you're good with your hands and you want to be fixing things, we desperately need maintenance people. Whether you have wonderful customer service skills and know how to sell ice in the desert, there is a place for you in sales. If you have administrative capabilities, we have plenty of opportunities for people with all of the technology that we've been rolling out. And if you want to be a middle manager, and I'm going to talk about that at NAA next week, our regional property managers are the connective tissue that holds everything together in property management from my perspective. So there's a place for everyone who has an interest. But most importantly, as I come towards the end of my career, I think what has given me the greatest amount of joy is that I've been able to help people find homes where they can raise their families and make memories of their own. So if you have that passion, there's that opportunity. So start there. Visit your local apartment association. You can Google it and find out what local apartment associations are in your area. They offer great educational programming that's available to you both virtually and in person. Meet people that are in the industry. And I promise you, when you engage with someone that's in the industry, they'll do everything they can to help you, because we desperately need people to continue to enter this field. And as our profession grows and as people continue to need places to live, you'll never have to look for another job again.
Absolutely. You can make this a career, as Alex has done and I've done. It's been over 30 years. And I walked into an apartment community when I was in college, looking for an apartment. I walked out with an apartment and a job thinking, oh, this will be a fun temporary thing. And it's been my
And here
life.
you are.
So here I am. Here we are. So it's an incredible industry to get involved in. And as Alex mentioned, there are just so many opportunities to grow and expand, and you can try different things. So Alex, it has been such a pleasure to have you here on the You Deserve More podcast spotlight interview series. I truly appreciate your time and your wisdom and your thought leadership. I can't wait to see you next week. Tell everyone what your session is titled and what it's about.
My session is titled The Vital Role of the Regional Property Manager. And I read a book called Power to the Middle, which talks about how important middle managers are in all kinds of professions and all kinds of fields. And I thought, yes, that is a critical role in the property management industry. And so I want to talk about the skills that are needed and tools that will help current regional property managers be better at their jobs.
I love it. I can't wait. Hopefully I can attend. Your session at the South Carolina Apartment Association was great about the different generations. So I will look that up on the Apartmentalize app, and I would love to be there. Thank you again for taking
My
the
pleasure.
time. I look forward to seeing you next week. Everyone, thank you for tuning in or catching the replay, and we'll see you on the next one. Make it a great day.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Alex.